Stop scrolling for a moment, because what you're about to hear will change how you look at the entire history of technology. If you're someone who loves hidden stories, forgotten geniuses, and mind-bending facts that reshape your understanding of the world, then hit follow right now, because today's story is one you won't want to miss. It's about a woman who wrote the first computer program, at a time when computers didn't even exist. Sounds unbelievable? Good, because it gets even crazier. Imagine living in a world lit by candles, where people traveled on horseback and communicated through handwritten letters. No electronics, no circuits. No machines capable of computation. And yet, in this era, one extraordinary mind looked at a complex mechanical device drawn only on paper and said, "This machine could calculate. It could process information. It could follow instructions," before the world ever even conceived of digital logic, binary systems, or electronic processors. She envisioned a future where machines would not just perform arithmetic, but compose music, create art, analyze data, and solve problems humans hadn't even invented yet. Her name was Ada Lovelace, and she didn't just write code. She imagined the entire field of computer science a century ahead of its time. To understand how shocking this is, you need to step into the 1800s, a time when society believed women weren't suited for intellectual work, when scientific institutions were controlled exclusively by men, and when mathematics was considered far too complex for a lady to engage in. Yet this woman not only mastered mathematics, but produced ideas so radical, so futuristic, that even scientists of her time could not comprehend them. Ada was born in 1815, the daughter of the famous poet Lord Byron. Yet ironically, she inherited none of his love for emotional verse and all of her mother's passion for logic, numbers, and reason. Her upbringing was strict, designed to suppress any poetic madness, but instead, it sharpened her mind into one of the most brilliant analytical machines of her era. While other young women were trained in etiquette and music, Ada spent her youth studying algebra, geometry, and mechanical engineering, fields that society believed were unsuitable for a woman. But Ada wasn't concerned with fitting the mold. She was concerned with breaking it. Everything changed when she met a man named Charles Babbage, a visionary inventor who had designed something called the Analytical Engine, a massive machine of gears, levers, and rotating cylinders. It was the world's first conceptual design for a programmable computer. But Babbage himself didn't fully understand the potential of his own creation. He saw it merely as a number-crunching device, a more advanced calculator. Ada saw something entirely different. She saw a machine capable of being programmed. A machine that could perform tasks by following a sequence of instructions, what we now call an algorithm. And here's the unbelievable part. The analytical engine did not exist. It had never been built. It was incomplete, theoretical, a dream on paper. But Ada didn't need the machine to exist in order to understand it. She could visualize its operation, imagine its abilities, and conceive of things no human had ever considered. While Babbage provided the hardware concept, Ada created the software. She translated a dense scientific article from French to English, but instead of stopping there, she added a series of extensive notes. Notes that were 3 times longer than the original paper. And inside those notes was something that would rewrite history: the world's first documented computer program. It was an algorithm designed to make the analytical engine compute Bernoulli numbers. But the beauty wasn't just in the calculation. It was in the idea. Ada understood that the machine could be programmed to perform any task represented mathematically. In other words, she realized what modern computer scientists now call the universality of computation. While everyone else viewed the analytical engine as a machine for numbers, Ada envisioned a machine for ideas. She wrote that the engine might act upon other things besides number, foreseeing computers, capable of manipulating symbols, generating music, and processing languages, concepts that wouldn't become reality until the 20th century. Think about that. A woman born in 1815 predicted modern computers, programming languages, software algorithms, and even artificial intelligence, all without ever touching an actual computer. Her mind was so far ahead that the world simply wasn't ready for her. Most scientists of her time dismissed her writings as imagination. They couldn't grasp the significance of her insight because they lacked the framework to understand it. Ada wasn't working in the future. She was the future. And the saddest part, she never lived to see her ideas appreciated. Ada died at just 36 years old, long before the digital revolution she helped inspire. Her work was buried in archives for nearly a century, forgotten by a world that wasn't yet ready to acknowledge her brilliance. But when her notes were rediscovered in the 1950s, right when early computers were being developed, scientists were stunned. Her algorithm was recognized as the first true computer program. Her vision of symbolic computation became the foundation of computer science. Her prediction about machines capable of composing music was confirmed with modern digital audio synthesis. And her belief that machines could one day express creativity is echoed today in fields like artificial intelligence, machine learning, and generative models. Everything she imagined, everything society thought was impossible, became reality. And that is the story you need to hear today. Because Ada Lovelace wasn't just ahead of her time, she was outside it. A K-mind that saw the world not as it was, but as it could be. A visionary whose ideas outlived her by centuries. A woman who broke barriers by seeing patterns no one else could. Her legacy reminds us of one powerful truth. The future belongs to those who dare to imagine it long before others can see it. And if you want more hidden stories like this, stories of forgotten geniuses, secret inventions, lost technologies, and the people who shaped our world from the shadows, make sure you follow, because what's coming next will blow your mind even more than this. The story of Ada Lovelace doesn't end with the creation of the first computer program. In fact, that moment is only the beginning, because what truly makes her legendary is not the code itself, but the world she imagined behind it. A world so radically different from her own that it would take humanity more than 100 years to catch up. To understand why her vision was extraordinary, you have to imagine her sitting at her desk in the mid-1800s, surrounded by ink bottles, quills, and stacks of mathematical writings trying to explain a concept so futuristic that not even the greatest thinkers around her had the vocabulary to describe it. Picture her running her fingers across the blueprints of the Analytical Engine, tracing the gears and rotating columns, seeing not a mechanical calculator, but something entirely unprecedented, a universal machine capable of transforming ideas into action. She realized that if you could convert something, anything, into numbers, the machine could manipulate it. Music could become numbers. Words could become numbers. Images, patterns, instructions, decisions, all of it could be encoded, processed, and transformed. This wasn't just a mechanical device. It was an early conceptual form of symbolic computation, the very foundation of modern programming. Ada understood that the machine could weave patterns, much like the Jacquard loom, except instead of weaving fabric, it would weave ideas. Her brilliance was in linking that analogy to computation. If a loom could weave flowers and birds into fabric using punched cards, a machine could weave logic, equations, and algorithms into patterns of information. This connection gave birth to a question no one had asked before. What else could machines do besides calculate? Ada's notes explored this question with incredible depth, going far beyond mathematics. She wrote about how the machine could one day compose elaborate musical pieces if those musical rules could be translated into numerical form. She speculated that computers might analyze entire bodies of data to find hidden relationships, what we now call data science. She imagined them solving scientific problems, exploring abstract ideas, and even engaging in creative work, ideas that form the backbone of modern AI. This was not fantasy. It was theoretical clarity from a mind that lived in the future. And yet, while Ada was expanding the boundaries of computation, the world around her was shrinking hers. Women were denied access to universities, scientific societies, laboratories, and academic networks. Most of her mathematical education came through private tutors, men who were initially shocked by her ability, but soon realized that her intellect surpassed what conventional society allowed. Her mentor, Augustus de Morgan, wrote that her understanding of advanced mathematics approached the level of the greatest male scholars of the age, something he found both impressive and alarming. Imagine possessing a mind capable of predicting the computer revolution, yet being denied access to even the simplest academic circles. Ada dealt with that contradiction every day. Her letters reveal a mind constantly hungry for knowledge, constantly pushing itself beyond what was available, constantly wrestling with ideas that were too large for her time. But the limitations she faced weren't just societal, they were technological. The machine she wrote her program for did not exist. The analytical engine was never completed. Funding ran out. Political tensions grew. Babbage clashed with investors and government officials. Every attempt to build the machine failed, not because the design was flawed, but because the world wasn't ready to invest in something so advanced. Imagine writing code for a computer that will not exist for another century. Ada knew her work might never be tested, never executed, never proven. But that didn't matter to her. She wasn't writing software for a machine. She was writing the blueprint for the future. And in her correspondence with Babbage, she often thought even further than he did. While Babbage envisioned the analytical engine as a mathematical tool, Ada saw it as something far more profound, a machine capable of mimicking processes of the human mind. Not replicating consciousness, but performing logical operations in a structured, automated way. This idea, a machine carrying out cognitive tasks, would eventually become the foundation of theoretical computer science and artificial intelligence. You might think this level of foresight came naturally to her, but Ada's journey was filled with struggle. She dealt with health issues her entire life. She suffered from bouts of paralysis, severe migraines, and chronic pain. Despite this, she continued studying late into the night, often writing by candlelight until her hands shook. Her notes were not the work of someone casually exploring a subject. They were the work of someone obsessed with understanding the universe. Her mind operated like an algorithm of its own, constantly processing ideas, constantly building new mental frameworks, constantly searching for connections others could not see. But Ada's genius also came with a price. The more she pushed herself intellectually, the more isolated she became socially. People around her struggled to understand her ambitions. They could appreciate her charm and wit, but they could not comprehend her hunger for abstract reasoning. Even Babbage, who admired her deeply, sometimes seemed unsure of how to handle the magnitude of her insight. Yet Ada never let doubt, illness, or societal restrictions dim her vision. She believed that one day machines would play a crucial role in every aspect of life. She wrote that the analytical engine holds a position wholly its own, and that it might one day give rise to a new, vast discipline of science. She predicted the birth of computer science before the term even existed. She predicted a computational revolution before electricity itself was widely adopted. She predicted the transformation of human society through machines before anyone else could imagine such a future. Her notes are not simply technical documents, they are philosophical meditations on the power of technology to reshape humanity. She envisioned machines being used not just for calculation, but for helping humans think, create, and innovate. She saw machines as partners in intellectual work, not just tools. This idea, machines assisting human creativity, is the essence of modern artificial intelligence. Now imagine the weight of this knowledge sitting in one person's mind during a time when most people couldn't even read or write properly. Ada was carrying concepts that belonged to future centuries, and she did it with a confidence that defied her era. And perhaps the most astonishing part is this: Ada did not see herself as a genius. She saw herself as a translator between worlds, the world of mathematics and the world of possibility. She described her work as poetical science, a blend of logic and imagination, numbers and ideas. And maybe that's the real reason she could see what others could not. She wasn't bound by the rigid thinking of her time. She allowed herself to imagine. She allowed herself to think abstractly. She allowed herself to dream scientifically. When her notes were finally published, they should have changed the history of science. But they didn't. Her ideas were ignored, overshadowed, and undervalued. For almost a century, her work sat in silence, collecting dust, waiting for a world advanced enough to recognize what it had missed. And when that recognition finally came, it came with awe. In the 1950s and 60s, modern computers emerged and programmers wrote the first lines of machine code. Researchers stumbled upon Ada's notes. They were stunned. Everything she predicted was coming true. Her algorithm was the first program ever written. Her ideas about symbolic processing were foundational. Her vision of computer-generated music was prophetic. Her belief that machines could aid human creativity was revolutionary. A century late, but finally, the world understood. Ada Lovelace became known as the first programmer, the mother of computer science, the prophetess of the digital age. But titles alone do not capture what she truly was. She was a mind uncaged by time, a thinker whose ideas were too vast for her era, a visionary who imagined a digital world without ever seeing a machine. And here's the truth most people never realize. Ada did not simply predict computers. She predicted us, our era, our technology, our relationship with machines, our dependence on algorithms. Everything she saw is now the world we live in. Her story is not just a historical account. It is a reminder that the future is often shaped by people the world isn't ready for. And if her story teaches anything, it's this. Imagination is the spark that ignites every revolution. Ada Lovelace imagined computers. She imagined programming. She imagined a world powered by logic and creativity working together. And that world exists today because she dared to ask one extraordinary question. What if a machine could think? The legacy of Ada Lovelace becomes even more fascinating when you trace how her forgotten ideas quietly shaped the world reliving in right now, because the truth is this. Every time you unlock your phone, use an app, send a message, stream a video, run a program, or even interact with AI, you're experiencing the future she predicted long before anyone else. But to truly appreciate the magnitude of what she accomplished, you have to examine what happened after her death, how her ideas resurfaced, and how they rewired the entire direction of human progress. Imagine her notes sitting untouched for decades, trapped in dusty archives while the world moved forward without the faintest clue of what they contained. For nearly a century, engineers continued to develop machines that could add, subtract, and crunch numbers, but none of them dared to think as big as Ada had. No one imagined using machines for symbolic logic, creativity, music, art, or automated reasoning. They were building calculators, not computers. Ada wasn't building a machine, she was building a universe. And it wasn't until the 20th century, during the rise of modern computing, that scientists began encountering ideas that sounded eerily familiar. Scholars studying the early foundations of computer science stumbled upon her writings. They realized that long before Alan Turing explored the concept of universal computation, long before Claude Shannon pioneered information theory, long before John von Neumann structured modern architecture for computers, Ada Lovelace had already articulated the philosophical essence of computational logic. She had already envisioned machines capable not just of processing numbers, but of manipulating symbols. She had already described a world where computers could create music and art. She had imagined computers as extensions of the human mind, partners in creativity and intellect. These weren't minor predictions, they were conceptual breakthroughs. And suddenly, scientists of the 1950s and 1960s began asking a haunting question. How did a 19th century woman, working without a machine, without formal scientific institutions, without any precedent, predict the future so accurately? Some claimed it was intuition. Others claimed it was brilliance. But the truth is deeper. Ada was a rare combination of artist and mathematician. She saw the poetry in logic and the logic in poetry. She was indeed bound by the rigid frameworks of her era because she belonged to a future era. She didn't think like the 1800s. She thought like the 2000s. And that duality, logic fused with imagination, became the driving philosophy behind the evolution of computation itself. When early programmers in the mid-20th century began writing code, they realized something profound. Ada's algorithm for Bernoulli numbers had structure, clarity, and logic consistent with modern programming principles. It had loops. It had instructions. It had operations defined step by step. In fact, many historians now consider it not just the first algorithm, but the first example of structured programming. Think about that. The first structured program wasn't written by a 20th century computer scientist. It was written by a visionary woman in the 1800s, working with quill and ink on a machine that didn't yet exist. And just as astonishing is how Ada's ideas found relevance in the birth of artificial intelligence. When early AI pioneers such as Alan Turing, Norbert Wiener, and others debated whether machines could think, Ada's writings were rediscovered and quoted as early philosophical foundations. She had already anticipated the debate. She wrote that machines might follow analysis, but not originate. She understood the difference between mechanical reasoning and human creativity. Yet she also acknowledged that machines could mimic creative processes if the rules behind those processes could be described mathematically. Today, we're living in that future, where generative models create art, compose music, analyze patterns, and produce content. Ada foresaw all of this. She foresaw a world where machines assist with thought, where algorithms shape human decisions, where technology becomes a collaborative partner. And yet, despite her brilliance, her journey wasn't one of universal admiration. For decades, there were debates about the extent of her contribution. Some dismissed her work as being overshadowed by Babbage. Others claimed she merely annotated his ideas. But these arguments collapsed once historians examined the letters between Ada and Babbage. In those letters, Ada wasn't a passive assistant. She was the intellectual force pushing Babbage to see the broader potential of his machine. She challenged him. She expanded his concepts. She saw possibilities he couldn't see. Babbage himself described her as the enchantress of numbers because her mind could conjure ideas no one else could imagine. And even when Babbage doubted the power of symbolic computation, Ada insisted that the analytical engine could operate on things other than numbers. That insight was unmistakably hers. Modern historians now agree that Ada didn't just contribute to computer science, she sparked it. When you examine her notes, her theory of symbolic computation, her algorithmic thinking, and her predictions about creative machines, it becomes clear she laid the conceptual foundation for what the digital age eventually became. And yet, the tragedy remains. Ada never lived to see her impact. She never saw a functioning computer. She never received recognition in her lifetime. She never knew that one day, programming languages, computer systems, and even awards in her name would exist. But the legacy she created defied time itself. In the mid-20th century, when programmers were designing early languages, the U.S. Department of Defense created ADA, a programming language named in her honor. Universities began teaching her notes as part of foundational computer science. Her story spread across the world, inspiring millions, especially women, to pursue careers in STEM. Today, Ada Lovelace Day is celebrated globally to honor women in science and technology. But there is another layer to Ada, a story that most people never explore: the philosophical impact of her work on the relationship between humans and machines. She saw machines not as replacements, but as amplifiers of human potential. She saw computation as a collaborative system where human creativity and mechanical precision work together. She understood that the greatest breakthroughs would come from merging imagination with logic, art with mathematics, dreams with engineering. And that philosophical foundation shapes everything, from modern software engineering to AI ethics to human-computer interaction. Ada Lovelace wasn't just the first programmer. She was the first person to understand what programming truly is: the act of designing instructions for a machine to execute tasks that originate from human imagination. She saw programming not as a technical skill, but as a creative discipline. And she believed that the real power of computing would emerge not from numbers, but from ideas. She wasn't just predicting the digital age, she was defining it. And here, as the final twist in this story, Ada's life reminds us that revolutions don't always start with machines. Sometimes they start with minds. A single idea, written on paper, can become the code that runs a civilization. A single spark of imagination can set the stage for centuries of innovation. A single voice, unheard in its own time, can become the foundation of an entire future. Ada Lovelace was that voice, and her legacy is a reminder that brilliance does not require validation to be true. It does not require recognition to be real. It does not require the world to be ready. Sometimes, the world has to evolve to catch up with the mind that saw it coming. So as you hear her story today, her brilliance, her struggle, her vision, remember this: our entire digital world, from smartphones to supercomputers to AI, exists because one woman dared to imagine it when no one else could. And if you want more stories like this, stories of visionaries who rewrote history, geniuses who lived in the future, and forgotten figures whose ideas built our world, make sure you follow right now, because what's coming next will open your mind even further.